When it takes a while for the video to resolve. Originally, when I put up that slide, it looked horrible. It looked like just instead of like a canvas that was just colored instead of individual stars. So it was kind of good. It's been up there for a while.
I don't see Eric.
Yeah.
He's...
Maybe you're. All right.
So let's get started.
It is 10 o'clock.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Singapore and welcome to the DHC Working Group. So, if you haven't read that, please note well. Okay, so blue sheets, they are circulating somewhere. Please make sure that you sign them up. We need Jabber scribes. So, any volunteers? Hello, people, wake up. Okay, so I will try to do it, but yeah. Also, there's Etherpad. It's helpful if you help write the minutes. It's like collaborative effort. So this is the DHC working group. So there are two chairs. This is Bernie Vos, and I'm Tomek Mruglanski. Hello. Okay, so what we have on the agenda today, administrivia, this is the thing I'm going to right now. After that, we're going with the problem statement of multi-recurrent extensions for DHCPv6. After that, we have two presentations from Ian. Please be gentle on him. So he's in Europe and it's like 3 a.m. for him. So he assured us that his coffee is strong and good, but you never know. And finally, we have the last topic. Sorry, the second topic that Ian will be talking about is prefix delegating relay. So this is a new material. And finally, we have a discussion about advancing DHCP to full standards. So Tim will be running the show. Okay, so what's the document status? We have several. The number of drafts is decreasing, which is good, but still there are some new appearances. So the first one, Vising Young. So this is something that's on agenda today. Macasine, it's still going through the last call. Bernie and I will talk about wrapping this up in a couple of days, but there is still time to share your comments. So if you have some time, please read it. It's a short draft. I mean, it's like 12 or 14 pages. So the next one, problem statement of MRE. This is on agenda. The next draft, DHC slab quadrant. This is something that's also in last call. So again, please share your comments. And finally, the last related draft. So this is still individual. The prefix delegating relay. It's on the agenda. And I think that's it regarding administrivia. So let's go with the.
Likes to bring up the agenda.
Scroll down.
But no, I don't know. It seems to always want to bring up the agenda unless you get it just right.
And scroll down.
Oh, okay. There it is. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Okay. And hopefully. Here, you should be able to advance. Let me see if yeah, for some reason it doesn't like to do it sometimes. Okay, now it's working, isn't it? Yeah, it's not doing it in the... There we go. Okay, now it should be okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lin He from Tsinghua University. Today, I'm going to talk about the update on problem statement of multi-requirement extensions for DHCP v6. First, let's have a quick recap of this document. We introduced the multi-requirement extensions for DHCP v6 in IETF 98 in Chicago for the first time, and in the IETF 104 in Prague, we presented this work and the community considered it valuable. And Bernie, Tommy, and some other people on the mailing list gave valuable comments on this document. And we updated the two versions to solve the open issues before IETF 106. The main changes since IETF 104 include in Figure 1, the general DHCP model. We modify the message processing functions into message relaying functions for DHCP relays, and we modified the DHCP general model by adding external entities and inputs. And in section 4.2.4, we in the previous version we said DHCP v6 servers try to generate random addresses, but in this version we say currently the DHCP servers assign addresses, prefix, and some other configuration options to their configured policies. And we removed the section 4.2.5 extension principles and explain its content in the introduction. And we talked about enforcing local policies as use cases using more generic languages in section 5. This is the original DHCP general model, and which includes DHCP messages options and the messaging processing functions and address generation mechanisms, and we modify it in the new version. And this is a modified DHCP general model. We add external inputs and entities in this version, and to make it more general and clearer. And for DHCP, for messaging extension, we can not only define new DHCP messages to enrich its functionalities, but also we can extend the new messages to enhance its security. For option extension, we can DHCP v6 allows define new options to transmit parameters between DHCP entities, and also we can define new option. Also, the options may come from external inputs. For example, I've seen 7037 defines the radius options to exchange authorization and identification information between DHCP relay and the DHCP server. Next steps, and we believe this draft is ready for working group last score, and the open issues are relatively minor. And thanks for listening. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
So just as a reminder, this is an informational document.
Yeah, this is an informational document.
Yeah, Suresh Krishnan. So I read the draft. It looks like more like a survey than a problem statement. Like what did he mean by problem statement?
We start as IP addresses is closely to the manageability, privacy protection, service security, and traceability of the networks, and we summarize the possible extension points of DHCP-v6 to present an overview of the extensions.
Right, like, and that's why it's looked more like a survey of like, existing mechanisms in like specific implementations than a problem statement for something. So I think the name is like a bit misleading.
Yeah, it's Bernie Volz. It's a good point, Suresh. I think originally the problem was, they wanted a way to generate addresses with semantics in them, right? And maybe I'll have to go back. Maybe some of that got lost.
Okay.
And so it's a question about do we add that back in if it's not clear, or should we just change the title to make it more of a survey?
Yeah, I think like a change the title is like a better thing because I couldn't really see a specific problem statement anywhere in the draft. So,
and I think, it is a general mechanism, so it probably would be better to just make it a, here's a survey of mechanisms that exist or something.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's see if I can do a better job at this time.
Okay, so the next one is DHCP-v6 Young. So Ian, now it's your turn.
I think you have to hit the red button if he's in the queue. I don't know how that works. Let's see. Ian, are you out there? We're not hearing you. We see you.
Anyway, what about now?
Oh, yes. There we go.
Excellent. Okay. So that's working okay, is it?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Good morning. So I've got a couple of things for you. First one is an update to the Yang DHCP-6 data model draft that we've had kicking around for, so it's probably coming into its fourth year now, actually. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So I think the last time this was presented was back in at IETF 104, and the message then was that it was kind of languishing a little bit due to a lot of the existing co-authors having moved on to other things, and also the general size of the task that we were trying to tackle. I'm pleased to announce that this is no longer the case. So Michael from ISC joined us after the call for new authors at IETF 104. And I think we've got the thing very much back on the rails as a result of that. I wouldn't call it quite a ground-up rewrite that we've got, but pretty much all of the content in there is new. I mean, we've reevaluated all of the model structures, the scopes that's in there, a lot of moving out of unnecessary parts, and a lot of refocusing really on just, what are the important things of building an extensible set of models and coming up with guidelines and rules for how the extensions can be done, so that we can leave for subsequent work any, adding new functionality and things, and modeling the rest of the protocol, depending on what people find to be relevant and are willing to put the effort into doing. Can we go on to the next slide? So what I proposed and what we ended up doing was basically refocusing on just getting a decent model that covers what's in 8415. the boil the ocean problem of that we originally set ourselves, and I think really dramatically underestimated what was going to be possible, of trying to model kind of the state of the art of the protocol. The resulting work was just too huge. Refocusing on 8415 has given us something which is much easier to work with, and I think they're much easier to read and hopefully for people to review as well. We've also managed to do this in a way that I don't think we've ended up with too much duplication of functionality and duplication in the models as well. So we've got quite a good reuse mechanism, which I'll come on to on later slides. Could we go on to the next one, please? So, strangely enough, we kind of overlooked how this model or the models would interface and interwork with other existing Yang models, and particularly around IETF interfaces. Sorry, I don't know quite how we managed to do that, but there we are. So we've restructured this to use the existing interfaces tree that IETF interfaces provides us with, and then we take this and add in the functionality that we need on top of the already existing interface refs that provides. What this then means is that for every interface that you wish to provide configuration for, it kind of gives you a structure in which that can all be built, and it makes it for much better into working with what's already there, and I think it makes just a lot more sense as well. We'd also overlooked any data about any state data and timer data, which again seems to be a fairly glaring omission now that I came back and looked at it, so that's fixed as well. We removed a lot of the stuff that was done in features in the past, but one thing that we have left, and I think the only existing remaining feature actually is for prefix delegation, because obviously not every client has that. And we've also gone back and cleaned up a lot of the notification stuff that wasn't really working either. Next slide, please. The server has probably had more reworking than anything else, because that one was really starting to spiral out of control into the size of what the model and the amount that we were trying to do in there. So a lot of the things that we've decided that were really implementation specific, we've now just shifted out of the server model, because really there's no realistic way that you can try and cover things that are going to please every implementation in there. So the best solution there was just not to try. We also think a lot of the value of having a common model here is around and where a lot of your investment in building network-wide configurations and the time that goes into that is actually around client configuration, or at least configuration pools, the network objects, and the other things around that. And so we kind of said, well, if that stuff can be built and that can be transferable between different implementations, then that's a much higher value than saying we want a model that is also transferable for implementation-specific functionality as well. So I think we, that's how we decided to structure it. But I'll talk about that a little bit further in a second. So anything around things like database backends, interface configuration, we shifted this out. This now exists in the appendix, and it gets augmented into a particular container which is provided for exactly this purpose as it's necessary. Next slide, please. The same thought process went behind the client class selections process as well. So Michael did some digging into, I forget how many implementations it was, but it was probably about 5 or something he looked into, and found that whilst the way that we classify incoming messages so that we can give them the right options, the right select addresses from the right pools and things, this is a common problem that needs to be solved. There's a lot of variance in how this is configured. This is how it's described, and also kind of the idea behind how it's structured. So once again, we thought that the best thing to do here was just to take that functionality out of the main model and provide a example set of this, which we moved into an appendix, and show how this would interwork, and show how you could take either the model that we have there, or use this as a basis for building your own. Next slide, please. Another thing that really was spiraling out of control in the original model that we had, or the version 8 model, was the modeling of DHCP options. I mean, I think we're up to about 130, 140 now, or something like that, with a few emissions in there. And originally, we'd taken this idea of saying, well, we can, from a modeling perspective, the structure of a DHCP option makes it fairly trivial, although somewhat labor intensive, to model these things. So we tried to do this. We tried to model every option that was out there. We then tied ourselves in a different knot of saying, well, how do you deal with variance of implementations? How do you deal with the fact that some options are only relevant for clients, some are relevant for relays, some are relevant for servers, or pretty much any permutation of those as well. And we ended up with a rather nasty set of features and things that, it just, the more the options went in there, the uglier the whole thing got. It was also going to make it very difficult to maintain, and every time a new option gets ratified, then we end up with an out-of-date model. So we kind of went back to that and have cut the scope of those options down to just the relevant ones which exist in 8415. We use an identity mechanism to define whether we're dealing with a client, a server, or a relay, and then we augment the options based on what that identity is as is relevant. What this also, actually, if you move on to the next slide, what this also does is provides us with an easy way of making it extensible. So the format that we define in the 8415 set of options, we also can do for really as many as necessary. And then the idea being that a device which implements those particular options can would obviously implement the Yang model that would support those options to define the configuration of those options, and so those can be loaded accordingly, and then we get ourselves out of the feature mess. So again, we've gone down the line of providing an example of this. We used RFC 3319 because it's the first numeric set of options that don't exist in 8415, and they're also nice and simple as well. So it was a good candidate for an example. So we provide this Yang module in there, and we show how that can be augmented into place. There's also 9 or 10 guidelines that are in there, which describe how we're doing the naming conventions, a bunch of different other things that would hopefully make it pretty easy for people in the future to follow the same kind of format and come up with a set of a Yang module that will work within this mechanism and would be consistent with everything else that's going on there as well. So this was something we talked about previously, but is actually we put into this version as well. And I think the last slide. 30 minutes for this seems a little bit ambitious. So yeah, we think we've now got everything that's in 8415, which is kind of what we set ourselves the scope to do. One thing that I would be interested in here is, from anyone who reviews or anyone who's had a look at this, is the scope enough now? I mean, we've pared it down so significantly. Have we gone too far? And if so, what are the essential things that would need to go into here to give us this framework and a basically fundamental set of models that can be used with a good way of being able to give extensibility as necessary in the future. So I'd be very interested in hearing about that. The amount of work that's gone into this has been, because there's been so much kind of restructuring, rebuilding, rewriting, doubtless gremlins have crept in here as ever the time caught up with us, and so we were kind of rushing to get the thing out the door before the final deadline with the big changes in place. So it needs really more eyes on it from that respect as well. So I think that with this version, its feel and the way that it's is just vastly better than what we had in the past. And from my perspective, I think that we're getting to the stage where it's ready to start thinking about a work group last call process for it. Obviously, subject to reviews, comments, and everything else to get it there. So that's everything I've got for you on this one. Any comments?
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for getting up very early for this. So, Suresh Krishnan. So, one thing I noticed, like, that seems wrong is the revision handling for this. So, this version is really not backward compatible with older one. So, I think you need to bump up the revisions on the Yang modules at the minimum.
In the headers of the Yang modules themselves.
Yeah. So, like,
okay. I mean, this is probably an example of a gremlin that's in the rush to get them out of the door.
Yeah, so I think all the modules need to bump up because they're in like 2018-09 or something. So I think that needs to get bumped up. Other than that, I think it looks good. Like, I think the cleanup, like, to limit the scope is a good idea. So, thanks.
Bernie Volts, Ian, do you foresee that there might be a companion document that does the remaining options, or how do you see that sort of, I mean, you mentioned, I haven't looked at the details, but you mentioned there were some naming convention guidelines and things like that, but I'm just wondering, what you feel. I mean, maybe it's too early to really think about it because we haven't gotten the base thing done, but I think it is just a question that I have is, would we likely need to do a follow-on which would define the rest of the options that are.
Well, I mean, it depends. I think with option definitions, there's a bunch of simple options out there that really, they are exactly that. They're just a DHCP option implemented by the server, implemented by the client, and don't specify any additional functionality. The 3319 example that I have in there is, is exactly like that. And so it's fairly easy in that case to just say, right, let's just go and define all of those things and, and make a module that will cover all of those. But there's also a load of options that are related to, in some cases, some fairly complicated additional server functionality or client functionality. And just having the options defined in there without having the configuration to make that stuff actually work. I'm thinking about things like, what's it called? Sorry, it's very early in the morning. Lease query and stuff like that, bulk lease query and things. There's an option that's defined there, but what it's actually specifying is a bunch of other configurational stuff that the server would need to be able to handle. And so just defining the options necessary for lease query is not a lot of use to you if you don't have the rest of the stuff that's in there. However, I think it would be possible to sort of, go through the option set. And I mean, I've got lists that I've made of where I've attempted to do this down to, so yeah, we could do a companion document that just says, here's all the low hanging fruit. But, when it comes to the prefix delegate, the lease query and stuff like that, it would need a much, much more detailed look at how to do it.
Okay, so it sounds like there's potentially a lot more work there if we were to model the
it's
rest.
become a big protocol, yeah. I don't know if you noticed. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think though that we are in a place that, or this does put us in a place whereby we've got a good, a solid framework that we can extend in that way. With some of these things, it just comes down to whether anyone's interested in it to actually be able to want to do the work around here. I think you're right, though. Maybe something that defined the 72, 77, generic option formats, that would be useful. In previous versions of the module, I think we've tackled that anyway. So, taking the thing and wrapping it inside the format that we're now using for options would be easy to do. Likewise, the older options. Yeah, I mean, all of this could be pulled together in a companion draft, no problem.
Well, it may be that, there'll be lots of drafts because one may cover the lease query and, there's the purely sort of data options and then there's the options that add new functionality, right? And so I think we have to look at how we would handle that, because I think something like, I mean, we could maybe bundle all the lease query, the active, the bulk and stuff into one document. Maybe we'll have to figure that out at some point, right?
Yeah, there's Tom Brugalski here. There's also the question whether we really need to specify all the options. I mean, some of the options are protocol options and they are generated by the server and they are not explicitly configured. So, like for example, you brought up the lease query. So, for example, the basic lease query, there is nothing really, no option value that you have specified on the server side. This is just a configuration of you enable or disable the feature, and this is not really a DHCP option.
Isn't there an option in which the least query information is transported? It's not one that I've read for many years, and I forget what the contents of it are. But I mean, as Bernie says, I think there's two kinds of options here. There's ones that are just here's a format, here's a data set, and you implement it or you don't. And there's things that require much more back-end configuration on there. And I mean, if we can just divide the things up and then produce the relevant modules for that, as I say, I mean, it's labor intensive, but it's easy to do.
Okay.
Okay. Are there people willing to review this document? Well, we have one hand out there. Okay, well, that's better than nothing. But do take a look and send your comments to the authors so that they can do these cleanups and get help with that. And we'll keep working away at this. It is a big challenge. I mean, it is a big task to do this. It's not as trivial as it would seem.
Okay, so it seems that we need to wait a little bit for the review to come up, and I suppose then there will be an updated version a couple of weeks from now, and then we can go with last call, right?
I would hope so. I mean, 2 weeks sounds ambitious, but as I say, I mean, I think we're in a pretty good place with it now. So it's just really the final work to get it over the line.
Okay.
Okay, so the prefix delegating relay draft. So first things first, I actually submitted the 02 version of this probably about an hour ago. Yeah, apologies for this. The 01 went out, and there were one or two things that we said that we would incorporate on there based on early review comments. That weren't done in there, particularly the document status has now been changed to informational. It was previously standards track. That was a comment from Alexandru Petrescu, I think, after 00 was released. So apologies for the late update on there. It was just a case of trying to make sure that we had the things in there that we said we'd incorporate. Can you go to the first slide, please? Okay, so at IETF 104, Mikhail Abrahamson did a presentation in V6 Ops about operational problems that we as Deutsche Telekom have seen with deploying V6. And one of the things that we mentioned on there was the trouble that we've seen with prefix delegation with when you have a separated relay function. So in our particular case, and I think this is a reasonably common case, you have your client, you have a DHCP relay, which is also the first layer 3 hop in the network. However, it is just a relay. It doesn't also implement the DHCP server function. That's a centralized function elsewhere in the network. Because the term delegating router, requesting router, relay, these are all kind of reserved terms and well understood to what they mean and what they define. We've actually taken a new term in there to describe this device, which we're calling a delegating relay, just to differentiate it from other things out there. Next slide, please.
Ian, I just want to inject one thing. This is Bernie. I mean, in like a DOCSIS network, the delegating relay would be the CMTS, for example. And I think in a BRAS network, it's the BRAS, right?
Well, the BRAS one is I suppose it depends here, really. I mean, I've seen BNG-based networks that implement, both the relay function and the server functionality, and that's not what we're talking about here.
Okay.
But I've seen other ones which will do a relay and, will forward to a centralized server. And I've certainly seen the problems in this case as well. So they would fall under what I'm calling a delegating relay here. We came up with the term really on the basis of just working the permutations of relevant words here, and to find one that didn't already exist. Although I think it seems descriptive of what the task is, the function that's being performed. If there's any suggestions for a better name, then I'm happy to hear those.
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to suggest that, because CMTS does a lot more, but that's one of the functions it performs is acting as a delegating router.
It's a delegating router.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Relay.
So I mean, that's one of the things where we, in the setup for the document, that we define as we're not interested in that particular function, because as far as I'm aware, well, actually, I've never really worked with those devices, but I don't think they have these problems, because a lot of it arises from state synchronization, and when the functions are co-located in a single device, that state synchronization is much less of a problem. Okay, so we've seen a bunch of problems down the years, and these things, really, there is not a major vendor's piece of hardware that we haven't seen one kind of problem or another in. So these range from the relay implementing logic about what it thinks the message flow should be, and then trying to make decisions based on this logic about what should or should not be forwarded. So this basically says, here's a message that I think is out of sequence, therefore I've decided that this will not get relayed. We've seen cases, particularly alongside that, whereby the relay will then generate a message of its own and send it back to the client. In this case, it'll come up with something like a no binding error code or something like this. I've been through the specs, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not aware of any case where there is a valid message flow directly between the client and the relay like this. But anyway, this behavior, it can't be correct, because essentially what it's done is blocked any messages coming forward, and also this information coming from the client, coming from the relay to the client, plays havoc with the client's state machine as well, and so you get all kinds of unwanted stuff at that end. Loss of PD state on reboot. So I think this is fairly well known, but if you've got a large number of clients on there and no permanent storage or no mechanism for rebuilding that table, the relay comes back up again and everything has to be rebuilt from scratch, and you're black holing traffic while that's taking place. Multiple PD leases is something that is very close to our heart. We've done a lot of, and the way that this is handled by different devices is, well, all over the place. So that's something that we wanted to try and kind of bring together. We've also seen some things about when duplicate MACs are seen between two different devices, or a device is moved from one port to another, and the behavior around what the relay does in that case is also unpredictable. So the idea with this draft was really just to say, these are the operational problems that we've encountered out there, enumerate those and provide a set of requirements that should enable us to solve those problems. One of the things that we've fallen foul of is when we've discussed these problems with the vendors, the respective vendors, we've got nothing to point to say, this is how this should be done. This is the the required behavior here. So that was really the problem that we're trying to fix with this draft. Next slide, please. So yeah, I mentioned about this in the intro. 8415 and 3633 before that, both name checked the architecture that I'm talking about here, but it's very, very thin on talking about how this is going to be done. So this point here that's been made on the redistribution of protocols into the routing protocol or whatever else, yeah, that's absolutely true. but we actually declare this part of the functionality to be out of scope because, there's many ways that this can be tackled. And it's not really what we're interested in here. It's much more the interface between the client and the relay, and also the relay's forwarding and processing of messages towards the server. So, I think there is space for this one, and it's kind of, an omission from what 8415 covers at the moment. Next slide, please. So the way that we structured this, and in the 02 update, we now have an informational draft, but we took the RFC 7084 type approach. The requirements that we have in here do use 2119 language, but we have a description in the early on in the document that kind of explains why this is done. It's lifted straight from 7084, and my thinking was if it worked then hopefully it will work now. We've divided the requirements into 4 different categories. I don't within this presentation actually go through what each of those requirements are because please read the draft for this, but we're talking about things like message forwarding, and trying to make that as stupid as we possibly can do, i.e. if a relay gets a message, a valid message, then it should forward it. It shouldn't, try and second guess what that should be done. Handling of multiple prefixes, permitting these things to happen, and also some information about lease and timer maintenance. That one's interesting, and we kind of, there's a little bit of, I understand, although it was kind of before my involvement with the IETF, I understand that when prefix delegation was originally defined, there were some concerns raised about the idea that effectively what we're doing here is snooping, that we're looking into the timers onto there. And to some extent, I don't want to write a document that says you must snoop the traffic. However, for lease and time and maintenance, I don't think there's anything else that you can do. But we used deliberately loose language around this to say that the relay must synchronize its timers, must have a way of synchronizing the timers based on the reply messages that are sent, the timers in the reply messages that are sent by the server. The routing, as I said, the scope for this we keep fairly low, and I think there's only 3 requirements that are in there. This is mainly about removing routes according to the timers, and I think we've got something in there as well about holding the route even if the link goes down. So if you've got a link towards the client, you get a link down event, then essentially, although the route cannot be active because the link is down, it should not be deleted because it's still, once that link gets reestablished, if the timers haven't expired, then it's still valid. So we've got a requirement in there about that. Service continuity is about really maintaining the leases across reboots. That comes down to either having some kind of permanent storage, or possibly implementing a lease query mechanism. Some operational things, which are basically being able to interact with the device, with the relay device, providing the user with an interface whereby they can check what's active there, and clear all them as required. Okay, next slide, please. So I mean, it's a fairly new draft, but it's not particularly, it's not huge in the scheme of these things. So it would be great if we could get some feedback on this. I'm particularly interested in other operators who are using a similar kind of deployment topology, possibly other vendors, to see whether we've first of all captured all of the problems that are in there, and also whether we think the requirements that we've defined in there are enough to be able to cover all of these different problems that people see. Beyond that, we'll be looking to make a call for adoption maybe after this meeting.
Tim Winters, UNHIOL. I have 2 comments. One is I really like this draft. We one of the hardest things we have finding is finding working relay agents, as weird as that's going to sound when you do interop. They do all kinds of strange things, like, won't forward certain message types. It's sort of an adventure. So I think this will probably help the community build useful relay agents. My only other question was, the draft name is obviously prefix delegation. I mean, we see the same problems with IANAs as well. I think you should specify the stuff that matters about PD in here, but I don't know if you should change the name to just things relay agents should do, and then have a couple of extra ones to hit on the
Right.
issues.
So, I mean, this is an interesting comment, because I mean, many of the things, well, actually, full disclosure, I really don't have any operational experience of using relays with NAs. And so if the problems are out there, I just don't know, because I've never tried doing it.
So, yeah, I mean, the ones I'm thinking about are those generic message ones, right? It doesn't matter what options inside of it. If it's not forwarding a specific type of message, that's pretty bad. I mean, it was only a couple of them. I don't feel super strongly about it. It's just something to think about.
Okay, I mean, I'll have a look at across that and see if there's something that we can, because it may be just as easy to fix it as not. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much.
Eric Klein. I think section 4.1 requirement G1, a delegating router must forward messages bidirectionally between the client and the server without changing the contents of the message. And I'm wondering, how does that comport with 6788, the line ID option? Because I think that gets inserted, right? It doesn't get, the client request doesn't get encapped and sent to a server, or does
Well,
it?
the relays encapsulate.
Oh, it is encapsulation, so it's not
Yeah.
actually modifying the contents.
So there's no modification needed, and there shouldn't be.
Fair enough. Thanks.
This is Bernie Volz, and I think that a lot of the issues also existed in V4 with just address assignment, because they were similar sort of problems and stuff. And I think there's also been a lot of work by the Savi working group in sort of defining how some of these intermediate devices, because the Savi stuff is, on switches and other forwarding engines, to assure that they are only, if they're monitoring what devices are out there and what they're, in their case, it's address assignment, not prefix delegation that they're dealing with. But, if the device, the switch or router is monitoring the addresses a device has, they have specified that fairly well. So I would encourage you maybe to look at that and see what they have to say about some of these issues. I mean, having state in multiple places is always a bad idea, because it's easy for it to get out of sync. And we already have it in two places, right? We have it in the server and the client, because the client has state. Now, when you throw another device in between there, it gets even worse.
So, I mean, in preparation for writing this, I did look into the Savi stuff. And originally, when I was kind of thinking, well, what would the contents of the draft be? I thought, well, the specification of the different state machines in the way that Savi does was what was going to be necessary here. However, on looking at that and thinking about it, I'm not sure it's the right answer. The reason being that, operationally, I think we have something that we can treat as being something like a black box here. We know what we're putting in, we know what we want to get out, we know what the behavior of this thing should be. Savi kind of goes much further than this and says, this is how you're going to do all of that stuff. And I'm not sure, I mean, certainly from an operational perspective, I'm not sure I want to have to specify all of that. And I'm not sure it necessarily does need to be. What was sorely missing was somewhere that I could point to with vendors and say, this is how it should behave. And how you do that, I'm not really that interested in. I've also had a similar discussion about saying, have you implemented Savi? Are you willing to implement Savi? And the answer there is pretty much a no. If it's not already in existence, then it's seen as something which is a pretty high overhead for implementation. So I was hoping, or I'm hoping with this case, that we can take this black box approach, and it's going to be enough.
Yeah, certainly. I think maybe that's the first step, is to, and then if that doesn't succeed, maybe we may have to go further, right?
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, would you agree though that trying this way might be, may be enough in the first instance.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually went looking at the DOCSIS specifications quickly to see, did they ever spell out all of the stuff that the CMTS has to do to keep up its state? And the answer is I couldn't find it. Now maybe maybe if I look harder I'll find it, but I did not find it. They do have a section which kind of says, here's some general guidelines, and so I probably should point you to that I found. And it was kind of interesting because it even hinted that there's a lot of in this case it's home routers and stuff like that only will support like one PD, and so seeing multiple PDs in there is a problem and stuff. And they said this is hopefully something that will be resolved in the future, that these devices will be more capable of dealing with multiple PDs and stuff. So it's I think that's some of the things that we have to put in here, is that these, if you're going to do this stuff, you should be you should be capable of handling multiple prefix delegations, whether they're in one IAPD or multiple IAPDs and stuff.
Right. Sorry, from the relays perspective, you mean?
From the delegating relays perspective.
Right. I'll have to. I think this. I can't remember if we say this explicitly or not. I mean, we certainly talk about things like restricting the number of prefixes that a client can support, but I can't. I think we say that it supports multiples. Actually, I don't actually have the relevant thing in front of me, but I can certainly check it.
I think it's just something we have to go and check to make sure that we cover that case and stuff. Because there's also, there's another discussion that's happening in V6 ops about how the CPEs themselves need to behave, especially in terms of the devices that are in the home or in the end network, and making sure that the router advertisements are properly handled and things like that, which is somewhat related to this, because it's how the in this case it's really how the client from the DHCP server, for the client in this case here, handles it, but it's somewhat related to this whole problem of these devices are not acting in the best manner to provide a good experience for the end user.
Is there a discussion on that topic?
Is there what?
Maybe. Is there a discussion on that topic?
Yes, it's in V6 ops. Who is it that has the draft? Is it Fernando? No.
Fernando, yeah, I read it earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So he's got a draft there that talks about the CPEs, it's themselves, how they handle stuff, and that they need to handle it correctly.
Yeah. Okay, but we don't have a topic, a subject
here
discussion today. No, there's nothing here. Okay. I don't think I'll be in the V6 Ops one on Wednesday, Thursday.
Yeah, we'd have to check the agenda to see when it's. Yeah, I think they have 2 sessions, if I remember correctly.
Right, but given the time difference, it requires too much rescheduling of the rest of. Okay. So yes, any other comments or feedback, reviews, all gratefully received.
Yeah, no, it's good work, and I look forward to it progressing. And we definitely, when you feel it's ready, we should definitely, I think, do a working group call for adoption.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I have procedural question for Suresh. So this is informational document. Is it allowed to use normative language? I know that 7084 did a trick.
Yeah, Suresh Krishnan. So it's generally frowned upon to do that. I don't think there's any straight up prohibition for doing it, but people do think it's kind of an end run around the system if a draft uses it. So it's not considered kernel in general. 7084 kind of stuff works.
Yeah, 7084 does have a big section on how it's being used. I think, Tim, you're one of the co-authors of that, right?
No, I was just heavily involved. But
Yeah.
It's a long discussion.
And I think you're using it in the same way, right? You said.
No,
I cut the text from it, so yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So is informational the right target status for this?
I think so, yes, but it could go either way, really, right? Like, but so the normative text is really for interoperability. So if you need it for interoperability, I would just say like, switch to proposed standard and let's get it done, right? So that's
Right.
kind of what I would recommend. But if it's like more about like requirement levels, not necessarily for interoperability, we can go either way. But I would really recommend like switching to a standards track document.
But surely it's fundamentally an interoperability draft, isn't it? I mean, it's talking
Right.
about how you interact with clients and servers that probably from other vendors. So
I would say switch it. Like it's earlier done than later. Like, no, I don't want to do like an IETF last call and then IESG eval and then try to switch it, right? So
okay, so we started off.
I know it's something that comes up, right? Like very frequently, even though there's like no written guidance, so it's a little bit flexible. But like I'm sure, like you're gonna have like 3 discussions on just the language.
Right. Okay.
so
I'm not sure. So I mean, I think it was Alexandru Petrescu who originally raised the point about the target standards status for this, but I can't recall what his rationale was for it. Is Alexandru in the room?
No, I don't think so.
No. Okay. Okay. I think I'll go back to Alexandru on the mailing list then, and just make the update him on this discussion. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Thanks.
Okay, so Ian, just a comment. So I looked at 7084, and there's the section that only looks like the usual reference to 2119. It says that unlike other IETF documents, the keywords must not, and so on, in this document are not used as described in 129. And your document says that they are used as.
Okay. Have I?
To update this paragraph.
Well, look. I mean, if we're going to take it back to in the 03 update, then if we're going to go back to standards track on there, then hopefully it's a non-issue.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's everything from me this morning.
All right. Well, thank you, and thank you for getting up early.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Tim Winters, UNHIOL. I'm going to talk a little bit today about advancing the DHCP 6 standard to an internet standard or full standard. The DHCP charter has a third item in it that is about issuing an update to the DHCP base specification after so much time to advance it to an internet standard, and that's what this is about. So a couple things, just housekeeping stuff. This is all from RFC 6410. There are really 4 bullet points under there, 2 independent interoperable implementations. In this case, right, that spec actually has 3 different types of, right, it's got a server relay, which we just talked about, and a client. So we'd have to find several implementations for all of those. No errata to the specification, no unused features in the specification, and no IPR on any of the things in it. So currently 8415, there's no erratas on it yet. And it doesn't update anything. It's not been updated by anything at this point. So it doesn't have any of those, and it doesn't have any IPR on it yet. So all of those are check boxes for all of those features, which leaves us with a couple of to-do items. Demonstrate interoperability of 2 clients and servers, and I messed this up. There should be relays on there too, comma relays. So we got to find a couple of different implementations, which I'll talk about some ideas we have in a next slide about that. And then we need to confirm all the features in 8415 are useful and nothing should be removed. We went through some of this when we merged 3315 and 3633. We removed some of the features. I think there's a couple more we should probably talk about as a group before we move it over. So to solve the first problem, the UNHIOL would like to host a virtual plug fest for DHCP people who are interested in doing this. I say virtual, the advantage of being part of a university is we have a lot of students who want to learn things. So we were thinking about taking a week. In particular, we're looking at the week of spring break. Nothing says spring break like DHCP v6. A lot of our students work the whole week that week, so it would be a good week for us to do it. So we say virtual because a lot of the plug fests we do, we require people to be on site. We don't think this one is going to require people to be there on site. Obviously, if a group of people want to come on site and they all want to work through the issues, we'd be more than happy to have them there. But in this case, we were thinking virtual. We're going to do it for free in this case because we think, we want the students to gain the experience. We can get our hands on the individual clients, servers, relay agents, all of those things. Whatever test plan we come up with, we're going to use as the basis for the V6 ready one that'll come out. There currently is a V6 ready one for the older specs. We have to update it. So we would use whatever we find from this and ship it off to the Ready Logo Committee as an extra. Anything we find that doesn't work, obviously we would report back to the DHCP group saying, hey, we found these features work fine. These things didn't work so well, stuff like that. In particular, we would really focus around the updates between the old stuff and the new stuff. I think there's old stuff from 3315 that might not work, but I don't think that'll be as interesting as the update stuff that didn't make it through. Also during the Plug Fest, we'll see if there's any features that no one has implemented at all. We would report back any of that. If we don't see any support in any of the implementations for certain things, we would report those back. This is a more generic question about that. So unused features, is there anything that's in the spec that anyone's aware of that, isn't used? The one in, I put IATA here. This comes up all the time. I don't know if people find it useful. We should remove it. Should we just leave it in there? I think now would be the time to discuss it again. If people want to talk about it.
Okay, so the original reason why we kept IETA is to make it easier for other implementations to claim compliance with this. I think it's marked as deprecated, so the new implementations don't have to implement this.
Right. My thing is, I've not seen in all of our testing, I've never seen a client ask for one.
Bernie Volz, I thought Windows clients they may not today, but they did at one point.
I think they did at one point. My last survey of them, I did not see any, but I will say, maybe there's bits you can twiddle to make that happen. It doesn't do it by default for sure. I don't know if there's something in the registry or some configuration you can turn it on. That I won't comp to. But we haven't seen any at the lab, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. I'm just not aware of any deployments that are heavily using those. Yeah.
And to remove a feature, we'd have to republish the document.
Yes. If we removed, yes, you have to republish it, I guess. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. We will post all the stuff about the virtual Bloodfest. The main thing we'll have a registration page for people to be able to register to, but we really want people's code. However we can get it, whether it's on a VM, on a Docker, whatever it is, if you can get us code for your DHCP implementation that's doing 8415. We have lots of eager students who would love to work with that stuff. So I'll keep the DHCP list updated with the details of it.
Bernie Volz, when do you think the IPv6 ready logo stuff will be?
I knew you were going to ask me this. I think if I had to guess, I would guess May. They do their major releases in November and May. So my guess is we would be aiming for a May timeframe. I haven't talked to the other labs about this, but I don't think it'll be a problem since we have a background. It's not like we're making something new. So I think this is just updating the old
just
stuff.
Changing.
Yeah, so I don't think this will be a major problem.
All right, well, thank you for doing volunteering to do the Plug Fest. I think that's cool. And that should help us greatly. I hope so. Suresh, do you have any comments about the process? Whether there's anything more we have to do or any red herrings you see?
Yeah, Suresh Krishnan. So I really hope we don't have to remove this. So it's like an easier process that way. There is a status change process that we have in place. Like I kind of got it down pat because I got rid of IPv5 and v7 and so on. So I know like how to do this process. And Eric is here, so if he gets on next, then he has to do that too. But I think that's an easier process than doing the document through the whole last call process, right? Because everything opens up. So you cannot just say, I'm IETF last calling this change, right? The whole document comes up, people are going to come up with things. So I think really if some implementation implements this, I would just keep it and then go on, right? Even if it's not widely used, if it's at least implemented, we have a case to just keep it and move on, right? And I don't think it's like significantly different from IANA to like have like too much extra code like just hanging around there for that. So I would just say like, go for the standard status change process if possible. And March is like iffy, right? Because it could be either in my term or the next AD's term. So like we have to figure out like, how the reports come out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to the end of the agenda. I think, just as a quick summary, the problem statement draft, you're gonna change the title. I think you want to leave the name, the document ID itself the same. The draft title, or not the title, but the draft name, I guess is the way to say it. Leave that the same. And once that's done, and if there's any other comments that you've received or whatever, we can, hopefully initiate a working group last call for that document. The Yang model, we need reviewers, as Ian requested. So anybody that can, please do so. For the DHCP v6 prefix delegation stuff, Ian was going to look at the 2119 language stuff, and maybe there's a few edits that he's got to do still, and then hopefully we can do a working group call for adoption. And for the advancing 8415, we're going to look out for the PlugFest information, the virtual PlugFest, and hopefully people will submit their implementation so that we can get sufficient coverage in that testing. They really should be 8415 implementations, not like 3315, 3633 implementations. So that's one of the key things that I think we have to make sure that they adhere to that. I don't know if there's any, that may be something we want to think about. Is there any sort of tests to sort of confirm that, other than somebody saying it? Maybe something about the RC 7550 handling of multiple.
Yeah, the main one we're going to mess around with that's really easy to tell is the T1 and T2 timers, because you have to match them up. So that's that'll give it away really, really quick.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yes, that one is a good one. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. Anybody have any last comments? Okay. Oh.
Yes. Francis Dupont. So we got a discussion about feature in DHCP inform response. There was expert draft which wants to clarify what should put in the response. For instance, to copy the client address when from the inform to the acknowledge packet. It seems a good idea because DHCP v4 specification, it's silent about this. And it seems at least some people believe it was a good idea. The problem is the draft was expired I believe in 12, so 7 years ago. I don't know why it was expired.
Yeah, so this really predates me before I joined DHC, but my understanding is that the major driving force behind this was David Hankins, and he changed jobs, and so basically the draft died.
So I don't know what to do. Perhaps we should discuss about it in the mailing list.
Well, I guess if you want to pick up the draft and can try to continue it, that would be something to do. We probably have to, we'd have to go through the working group adoption call again and stuff like that, because it is, kind of a long dead document now. So, you might want, if you want to pick it up and you think it's useful and important work,
Or-
we can take a look at it.
We should
Or
discuss.
maybe
it.
not, Suresh. Would it be okay? I mean, the 06 expired in 2012.
I personally don't mind like just reviewing the draft, like and try to, because like at working group last call you're gonna find out, but it's up to you like where you're gonna find out if there's support for it or not, right? And if it's something simple, like might be like just filing an errata, might be like a thing saying, hey, this is like some kind of clarification on the original doc, and then we can go from there too. But either way, like I'm okay. Like I don't want to like put too much process here. So if you can just rev it and add like Francis as the editor and keep moving, I'm okay.
Okay, so this is like
If Francis wants to be the editor, but yeah.
okay. So this is like 3 pages of the actual text. So
It's pretty short. And I assume you also have no issue with us adopting the prefix delegating relay work. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. And hopefully everybody signed the blue sheets. If you haven't, please do. I don't know where they are right now. I mean, one is up here, but I think we just used one. Where is the blue sheet? Does somebody have it? Oh, okay. Yeah.
about wrapping up the multi-sign. Hey.
What's that? Well, one of the issues